Hi there. I'm here today to chat a bit about my experiences with distance learning over the last 5 years, discuss how distance learning served or failed to serve both myself and my students, and examine some options for building a more inclusive campus for distance learners. Distance learners and distance educators, like researchers involved in fieldwork, often feel a sense of isolation, exclusion, and disconnection from the larger community. This presentation will focus on the challenges faced by the above groups and how educational institutions might better serve distance students. My experiences are a bit different, as I am both older than traditional students and neurodiverse. These differences, coupled with my choice to switch disciplines for my MA and PhD, made my distance learning experience even more challenging. For both my master's and PhD program, I undertook months-long research in a tiny Southeast Asian country of Nepal. While I was already well acquainted with Nepalese culture from previous experiences there, it was still challenging to live amongst a culture that's so vastly different than my own home country. My online support systems were vital during my fieldwork. Lastly, I teach at a U.S. facility for neurodiverse students and those with learning differences or autism spectrum disorder. During the initial COVID waves, I had to pivot during week 6 of the semester to online teaching. This remote teaching lasted over a year. My college typically avoids offering online instruction as they believe that neurodiverse students do not thrive in online settings. However, while a few students hated the rapid transition, most loved it, and I saw huge achievement level rises. First, let me offer a little bit of insight into neurodiversity and neurodiverse learners. Neurodiversity includes a long list of learning differences such as dyslexia and dysgraphia, autism spectrum disorder, Asperger's syndrome, Tourette's, ADHD, and others. Neurodiverse students struggle even more with lecture-based teaching and need more active and experiential learning options. However, these types of learning are difficult to offer in distance programs. Women and people from disadvantaged backgrounds struggle even more. Students who are neurodiverse or have learning differences need extra support. However, what each student needs is different, just as they are with physical differences. Therefore, getting to know student needs requires extra staff, commitment by teachers to develop relationships with students, and university support systems which are easy to locate. The added stress of having a learning difference can mean that students give up or become so frustrated trying to find support services, they simply do not declare their learning difference, do not pursue extra services, and eventually stop trying to complete their education. Neurodiverse students often explain that social and educational settings feel like they are attending meetings taking place in a different language, just as they may miss much of the nonverbal communication taking place. So just as we would create a learning environment to accommodate a student who is physically different, we need to find ways to accommodate neurodiverse students. For my own part, I did not declare a specific disability. One of the reasons for this was that there was no specific support system in place for neurodiverse students while I was doing my program. That has changed a bit. There are support systems in place, and the university is making an effort to more specifically support neurodiversity. While living among a culture different from your own is exciting, educational, and the highlight of many research programs, it's also very stressful and isolating. For distance students, the sense of isolation already underlies your educational process, and the added isolation of fieldwork can be stressful. For neurodiverse students, this is made more challenging by the lack of plasticity in a lot of our daily life areas, such as food choices, clothing choices, missing one's bed, one's pets, one's office space. Therefore, it takes longer to adapt to new situations, switch tasks, such as going from a review of literature or working in an office to field work in person. And in addition, many neurodiverse people have problems with their working memory, and the stress of changes or relocation further impacts this memory, meaning they need a few extra days to readjust prior to undertaking their work. Next, I want to discuss a few specific challenges that I faced during my master's and PhD programs at Exeter. I attended these programs from 2016 to 2021. There have been several important and helpful changes to PGR development at Exeter since then, as Kelly mentioned this morning. But I wanted to discuss some of the challenges my cohort faced, many of which still exist today. There's a sense of isolation that comes from being a distance learner, and part of this arises from the inability to just drop in and establish friendships or relationships with other students, staff, or faculty members. Distance learners feel less sense of ownership of programs, campuses, and don't feel like they belong to the larger student body. And in fact, many of them have never even visited campus. In addition, making new friends may not be a skill that older students or neurodiverse students are used to practicing. When you're a distance learner, there's no organic way for events to arise spontaneously. There's no drinks after work or drinks after classes. There's no pickup games. We're lacking those in-person opportunities. There's also more prejudice, teasing, and intolerance when you're based solely in an online format. And I think that comes from people's feeling that on social media or online, they don't have to watch what they say as much as they would when they are meeting someone in person. My cohort faced a few academic challenges. A lot of these were based upon distance. Some of them were based upon our age. Initially, lag times between asking a question and getting an answer were a problem. Distance learners are limited by the fact that they can't just show up at someone's office to ask questions or happen across someone going down the hallway. Typically, we can't call. We're trapped at the mercy of email, which makes us feel isolated and powerless. During my program, there was little to no university-sponsored collaboration, which I could find. There were few opportunities to find mentors and few opportunities to build community. Because I changed fields, that came with its own difficulties. I had to learn a new field, new research and writing styles while doing my program. Because I wasn't on campus, I couldn't simply audit classes or meet with people from other departments. In addition, distance learners faced a lack of access to most seminars, meetings, classes, and events. Most of these were not recorded during my tenure there. There were so many amazing topics and guest lectures offered, which we soon realized were inaccessible to us as distance learners. Lastly, older students had vastly different life experience and needs and expectations from the program. Rather than wanting to focus on getting the college experience, we wanted to jump right into discussions about our topic and our future. So finding groups of like-minded and like-aged individuals was very important. As a non-traditional student, I did run into additional technical challenges during my studies. Like many older students, I hadn't used educational software programs or certain platforms before, or I had used them so long ago that the kinds I had used were outdated. I had to learn new programs for writing, for attending classes, for accessing grades, for submitting materials. This was time-consuming and it was a big learning curve. In addition, there was a lack of access to some programs which I needed, such as language learning, which were just not available online. I also faced challenges from the fact that the university websites have a lot of data. This data is not easy to access, and there's not really anyone who could respond quickly or easily to point me in the right direction. This got more difficult when everyone went online during COVID and no one was present on campus. Sorry. I also ran into additional challenges from the fact that I worked full-time while doing my PhD. And while this is discouraged, it's a necessity for a lot of older students, especially given the cost of international tuition. So there is a need for specific support for working adults to encourage self-care, offer internships, and to keep them from feeling isolated or from working themselves to death. In my case, it was more difficult because I worked, lived, and researched in 3 different time zones that were 12 hours apart. So sometimes I spent my entire day teaching, my early evening studying and writing. And then during the wee hours of the morning, 3, 4 a.m., I had to conduct my phone or online interviews with my participants in Nepal. So this led to a lot of exhaustion, stress, and increased mental health challenges, which continue today. There are some things that I did which really helped me feel less isolated during my postgraduate research. I sought out like-minded, similarly aged students. I joined Facebook groups. I saw other researchers and faculty with similar interests via websites. I joined student-led reading groups and PGR sharing groups. I also sought out my own mentors from outside the university, whom I asked for guidance in my field. The university has made strides in supporting similar solutions to those that we had to develop on our own. For example, there are now university-sponsored online meet and greets, such as coffee meetings. What's needed is the addition of several more of these types of programs in a variety of time zones. In addition, there are some unofficial Facebook pages for PGRs. These pages need to be affiliated with and overseen by the university to prevent misuse. Staff or student mediators are needed for establishing and monitoring these Facebook groups to prevent one student from taking over and to ensure constructive speech. In addition, updated landing pages with researcher profiles, which would be private and only accessible to students, would be great so we could seek out other people with similar interests in different departments. We also need to have a willingness to fund paid PGR positions to help plan, support, and execute these programs. There's also a need to provide mentors from within the department, external to the department, and external to the university. And then a seemingly silly but additional suggestion that I would make would be for the university to mail out some sort of a physical welcome packet, because many distance learners have never been to the actual campus, which adds to our sense of isolation. We haven't had the chance to buy the t-shirt, as it were. A welcome packet could include small university-themed items, which might help establish a sense of belonging for distance learners. I did want to mention COVID for a moment and how COVID impacted learning at both Exeter and the undergraduate institution while I teach. At Exeter, COVID was a game changer. Suddenly, all PGRs were distance PGRs. Those of us that started as distance PGRs finally had a sense of belonging and access to everything offered at the university. Research groups, reading groups, conferences, speakers, everything went online. And suddenly we had a whole new world open up to us. And I think it's really important that we continue having access to these items, which I'll discuss more in just a moment. Get my slide to switch. As I mentioned, the college where I teach did not encourage online learning for students. And as such, when COVID hit, we had no teaching platform in place and only an outdated grading and communication platform. We were forced to move to Zoom, the free version at first, so classes were limited to 45 minutes and could not be recorded. We had to use email to send assignments, do our grading, etc. It was a nightmare. Students had no online arena to check for further instructions and could not access their learning team, counselors, writing support center, or other services other than via phone and email. As neurodiverse students do not typically pivot quickly, the added stress of the virus and these changes meant we lost an entire 6 weeks of learning. We essentially started over. We went into crisis mode to support our students. And when we finally purchased an online teaching platform to use, the transition to this new learning method cost our students a great deal more time. Our IT team was overwhelmed, unable to respond to issues quickly, which resulted in more lost data and more canceled classes. So the key takeaway of my experiences with both Exeter and the undergraduate college where I teach was that contingency planning is vital to student support. So what is needed to keep or improve this access that distance PGRs now have at Exeter? Well, distance learning is embraced by a lot of facilities as a good way to not only reach more students, but a less expensive alternative to brick and mortar campuses. However, this doesn't mean that they require fewer staff, even though most universities seem to operate as though they do. More staff and more faculty are needed to ensure that university-suggested response times, which is within 3 days, are respected. Students need to be able to access a real person in real time. There needs to be enough time for faculty to get to know students personally, chances to learn about the student and not just throw them into the program, which means more faculty are needed. Learners deserve and need at least monthly meetings with supervisors, second supervisors, mentors, or other staff, which means more faculty are needed. Students need clearly written and easily accessible answers to their questions. The current website is overwhelming, especially for neurodiverse students. So having smaller departmental or programmatic websites would be helpful, or having dedicated PGR support people educated in where to locate information. In addition, students need opportunities to continue collaborative work. These opportunities need to be sponsored by the university rather than forcing students to seek them out on their own. Students also need more interdisciplinary opportunities. We need to be able to find out who's doing what research, have university-led connections with mentors, and interdisciplinary cohorts. Next, I just wanted to offer a few suggestions for working with neurodiverse students. As most higher education faculties are experts in their field, as opposed to attending teacher training, they need to be given skills that are needed to work with neurodiverse learners. Therefore, more faculty training is needed to ensure that neurodiverse students are not left to fall through the cracks. There is a need to support opportunities for students, especially neurodiverse students, to meet other students, even online. Again, making new friends is not a skill neurodiverse students often have. These skills can be facilitated via online meet and greets, collaborative assignments, and the access to mentors who are themselves neurodiverse. They also need to offer very specific deadlines and access to special services that respond quickly. I know from personal experience that having dealt with faculty, guild, and student support services, occasionally months passed between the time I would email and the time I would receive a response. Staying connected during fieldwork is important for all students, but more so for neurodiverse students. So using social media platforms as methods for contact will be a really easy way to continue support of both remote researchers and neurodiverse students. But this does mean additional staff to oversee these platforms. In addition, some sort of small, specific, frequently asked questions board is needed for each incoming class. This could be on Facebook, Teams, the Exeter website. It needs to be something beyond a general frequently asked questions board, which can be overwhelming to neurodiverse students. So just wanted to leave you with some key takeaways that I think are important, both for neurodiverse students, distance learners, and researchers out in the field. I realize that some of these are not currently available. Limited funding is always going to be a problem, but perhaps these ideas can offer some jumping off points, which in the future Exeter might be able to incorporate. First of all, mentors. Offering mentors within the field and external to the college are vital. More staff to support students, more faculty, more student services are vitally needed. Information needs to be easier to locate. And there need to be a lot of opportunities for meet and greet between distance learners. Lastly, we need to remember that all students need to have the same access and the same opportunities so that they feel like they're a part of the larger Exeter campus. Thank you for listening to my talk today. I look forward to answering any questions you might have. Thank you.